what is your why, knowing that for me, it's more about helping the people in order to help the pets through helping the people who help the pets is really where I get more of my sparks of joy than actually sort of standing in front of a client, honestly.
That was Dr. Brent Mayabb, the guest today here on the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. I'm Dr. Megan Sprinkle, and here we meet with amazing veterinary professionals who have reimagined what vet life means for them. The possibilities for your career are endless. May you be encouraged and inspired. Dr. Mayabb is a veterinarian whom I've respected and admired for years. We both work for Royal Canin. He currently has a global role as Chief Medical Officer, but still practices some in clinic. He is a wonderful connector, listener, and leader. He's one of the few leaders I've seen loved by all. Let's meet him. So if you don't mind, do you mind starting back when you were little Dr. Brent Mayabb, not doctor yet, but little Brent Mayabb, where did you grow up? Do you have siblings? What did you like to do?
Well, thanks for the opportunity to be here. Let me just start with that. So I grew up in the southeastern part of Missouri. The people there call it the Bootheel because of that little part that sticks down kind of next to Arkansas. And lived there. Came from a small town of about 3,500 people. And for most of my life, I was an only child. And then after I turned 12, my mom and dad told me that I had a sibling coming. So I'm 13 years older than my nearest sibling, my only sibling. And literally the day they moved me into college is his first day of kindergarten. So my mom started the whole thing over again on the exact day, actually, as it turns out. And my background, I come from a family who no one had ever been to college before. So me going to college that day was the first person in the entire family to go to college, and even since then only the two people have, and the other one is my younger brother, and he's a people doctor now. He's a general practitioner back in the area where we're from.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what do you think helped you actually make that change in your family and being the first person to go to college? Was that something your parents really encouraged you to do?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it is they were they sort of saw how their lives had unfolded and the jobs they had, and they said the way to get ahead is to get an education, to go to college. And so they were really supportive of my education, things that I needed. They sort of prioritized growing up. Of course, we were from a small town. There was no choice in school. There was a school, and it was a public school, but it was fine. I mean, that wasn't a big deal. So, but I just to kind of clarify, I mean, sometimes early on that means picking the right schools, or this was more like giving me time to study, encouraging me to study, making me study in some cases. And then yeah, just when it came time to start to look at schools, they were very supportive and very open. And I looked at a couple of different schools and then chose the one that was right for me.
So, when did you decide that you might be interested in vet school? Is it at this point yet, or what are you thinking as you're going into college?
No, I only had a few pets growing up. It wasn't really the typical path that you hear from veterinarians. It's once I actually got to college. I started college as a political science major thinking I was going to go to law school, and my mom was a secretary in the HR department of a human hospital, and so I'd been around human medicine most of my life growing up. And I thought, do I, would that ever be something I'd want to do? Because coming from a small town, and this is, generalizing a bit, but there were basically four successful jobs. You could be an engineer, an accountant, a doctor, or a lawyer. That was really, what people sort of saw in the community as, the best jobs. And none of those, I thought I wanted to be an attorney. And I kind of, after I got into college, I thought I was just more or less picking one of those jobs, and that was the one I liked best. And I didn't really want to do any of them. And I honestly, I'm not sure where veterinarian came from one day. It just sort of popped into my head out of the blue. And I did like science, and I did like animals. And I thought I'll just see if I can do this. And I started that track. And then, yes, here we are today. I'm a veterinarian.
So, is there anyone in college that helped you or that you remember being very helpful during that time?
I was fortunate. I went to a small state school in the western part of Kentucky called Murray State University, and they had a really strong agriculture and pre-vet program. And the person who ran the program, it was also a program for veterinary technicians. So your pre-vet studies were actually going through the same classes as the technicians. So it was really practical, and the program head was a veterinarian, and so his name's Dr. Terry Cannerty, and he was super influential on how things went for me and how they turned out, and he gave me the opportunity to do some of the work that I probably should have been doing in high school for this career path in his clinic, and just really supported me a lot, especially not coming from this background.
Okay, so was he small animal then?
He was a University of Tennessee grad. He was from one of the early classes from the University of Tennessee, and he also had a private practice in addition to being the program head. And I think still that's still true today. I still think he operates his practice in Murray, Kentucky, and so he does a little bit of both. And so it's interesting because he's an academic, but not in the traditional sense. And he was very much around, this is what you need for practice, and this is what you need to know how to do, et cetera, et cetera.
Oh, well, that's another good example of something else you can do as a veterinarian. I never thought about teaching undergraduate students as well. That's really
Yeah.
interesting career path. All right, well, well, maybe we'll look him up too. um, so, when you thought veterinarian at this point, what did you envision that would look like in undergrad?
Um, again, they were an ag school, so I thought kind of had in my mind mixed animal practice. And just we worked on, they had a really strong rodeo program, and so we had a lot of horses that we helped out with on the university farm. We had some sheep and some goats, and we got to do a little bit of work on cattle. And then of course when I worked in his clinic, it was small animals. And so I thought just kind of that was the picture I had in my mind, was really the mixed animal practitioner.
Okay. Was there something that you observed of this particular veterinarian that you liked about his lifestyle, or what did you find most intriguing at this point?
He was a really good teacher. I mean, and that's the part I think that really impressed me the most, is he was just a really, really good teacher. He was a good surgeon as well, although I never really personally gravitated towards surgery. I could identify, what skill looked like in someone else, and he was a really good surgeon too. And so he was my first real in-depth exposure to veterinarians, and he kind of became the standard by which I compared other veterinarians to, and he was the best. I mean, he was just really good for a general practitioner. He was really good. And then when, of course, you get to vet school, and most of the other vets are specialists. I mean, that's kind of a different area they're working in, so it's not apples to apples to compare those two. But he was really good at being a general practitioner, and that impressed me.
He set the bar high, it sounds
He did.
like.
He did indeed.
All right, so you're ready to apply for vet school. What was that process like?
I was living in Kentucky, and but still a Missouri resident, and so it was pretty clear that Missouri was going to be the number one choice if I could get in there for in-state tuition, and because at that time, if I recall correctly, I think there were four applicants for every position, so there wasn't a lot of choice. It was kind of where you could get into, and so that was really my first choice. I did apply secondarily to the University of Tennessee because it was probably the second closest school to me, at least when I was living in Kentucky. And so those were the ones that I looked at. I didn't look at the University of Illinois because I'd heard, and I don't know if it was actually even true, but at the time I'd heard it was really hard to get in there if you were out of state. So I didn't even really try for that one.
Okay. So I do happen to know you went to Missouri, so you got into your first choice, which was
Yeah.
great. So what was your veterinary school experience?
Well, it was so different than undergrad, because it was so focused and so intense compared to undergrad. And but at that time, my hometown was 3,500. Murray, Kentucky at the time, I don't know, let's say I don't know, somewhere 14,000. I don't know. It wasn't very big. I'm not exactly sure how. All of a sudden, I'm in Columbia, Missouri, and that's 100,000. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow, this is such a big place. So there was that piece of it besides school, because school, got a lot more focused. Whereas with an undergrad of like 8,000 people, that was kind of the population. And in vet school, I then dropped down to, you know, a school of much smaller numbers than that. And so it became like a small school again on the campus of a very large school. And but just, living in a place that had restaurants and a mall, and I mean, I'd never done that before, and so I was kind of like, country mouse going to the city.
Oh, well, I was a resident at the University of Missouri, and so a lot of the faculty still remembered you as a student and spoke very highly of you. So you must
Wow.
have had a a good vet school experience. So you went in, I'm assuming, still thinking maybe mixed practice at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I just sort of went in with an open mind, and I think within the first semester, I kind of decided small animal practice was where I was most interested. And still at that time, the idea of practice was really my only idea. I didn't really know anything else. It was just kind of like, pick, the species you're going to work on, and then decide where you want to live to do that was really what I thought the career path was. But then um, we had a class that exposed us to the different types of roles veterinarians take. And it was and what was cool is they would bring in a veterinarian from those types of jobs, each type of job, and each week it was a 1 day a week class. Each week it was a different veterinarian doing a different thing. And sometimes they were, the other jobs that we often think about with veterinarians, like USDA vet, industry vet, so technical services. But sometimes it was just a job that a veterinarian happened to be in, but it wasn't really a veterinary related job. And I remember someone from the Department of Natural Resources came in and spoke to us, and he was a vet, but his job wasn't particularly veterinary oriented either. And so um, it was really not long after that that I kind of started to question this idea of, do I really want to go into practice at all? And I ended up really sort of gravitating toward the technical service type roles. And I asked some of the vets we had met, what do I need to do to get a job in technical service? And they said, you need to go work in practice. And I said, okay, well, how long do I need to work in practice? And they said somewhere between 3 and 5 years is good, because you need to understand where the practitioner's coming from in order to help them from, the pharma or the food side. And so I did that after vet school, went into small animal practice, and after 3 years started applying for jobs in industry.
So that's wonderful that the University of Missouri had that class that was able to show you different aspects of what you can do with your veterinary degree, which I love. And then I think you might have, did you meet your wife in vet school as well?
I did, and I think it was fate. I mean, I make the joke that she's one in a million, but lucky for me, I only had to choose out of 64. And what happened was, a few friends and I were out playing um, touch football, just having fun, and I tripped over my own feet and fell and broke my collarbone. And it was right before we were starting our clinical blocks, and because I couldn't use my left arm, it was in a sling. I had to go and have my schedule rearranged, and I got put into pathology, um, out of my schedule, and it was with my wife at the time, with a classmate, Julie. And I just, I had class with her, and we started hanging out, and it all blossomed from there. And so
Oh,
we ended up dating our senior year, and then both came back to St. Louis to practice, and got married 2 years out of practice, and are still happily married today.
oh, that's wonderful. I see that a lot where vets marry vets. So also another good, I guess, advantage to our field is no one understands us like other veterinarians
That's
sometimes.
right. That's
Oh,
right.
well, wonderful. Okay, so I love so early on you were already starting to get the idea of maybe I want to go more into an industry role.
Mhm,
Um, so you set out to do that, and it sounds like that, I guess that was helpful. You already had a plan after vet school. A lot of people
mhm,
just get out of vet school, get into clinical practice, and then their plan stops there.
mhm.
So it sounds like you had a couple of years out still that kind of planned. Um, any experience that you still kind of draw from that few years of clinical practice that has helped you in your career?
Not any particular experience, but I just think the summation of experience, I really, you know, at the time, I guess I sort of intellectually understood what they were saying, you need to go do clinical practice, but I didn't want to go do clinical practice, so I didn't love it. But now looking back, it's invaluable. And even though full-time clinical practice was not the right career path for me, I ever since I left clinical practice, I've never stopped doing relief work. And so I still do some clinical practice, but I mean, it's very limited. But the point is really to kind of stay connected to what's happening, within the walls of the veterinary clinic to not, necessarily lose that because in industry, you can. I mean, you sort of, with us, we're a nutrition company. We talk a lot about nutrition and, it's a good reminder when I'm in, you know, um, doing relief work that every client does not want to talk about nutrition, and or they've got their own ideas that don't align with yours and they don't want to argue about it. They believe what they believe, and I think that's really helpful to sort of understand a where the clients are coming from, and b where the vets are probably coming from as well, and how do those two things sort out together.
So you would still recommend that someone have about at least 3 years in clinical practice if they're thinking they'll go to industry? Okay.
I would.
Okay, wonderful. So what was that transition like from clinical practice into industry?
It I was really ready to get out of clinical practice. So, how do I say this? Almost any job I would have gone into, I think I would have liked better. Back when I left clinical practice, I don't think we were as aware of things as we are now. Like we didn't talk about burnout in the same way. Um, Burnout was like the middle-aged vet who wanted to sell their practice. That was kind of the picture of burnout.
Mm.
But what we see now, early on, in people in their careers, that was probably happening. We just didn't identify it as such, and we didn't talk about depression, and we didn't talk about compassion fatigue. We didn't talk about any of that. You just sort of did your job, and I had kind of hit a point where I think it wasn't the right role for me, and I I was ready to do something different, and so it came at the right time. So the transition was great because I was moving into something totally different, and I liked it, and it worked. I came into a corporate job, not understanding working for a corporation. Um, I came in and took the job that I thought I would be doing kind of forever, probably. I mean, I never thought about it twice. I thought, well, I'm not going to be in practice, so I'm just going to do this job, kind of getting promotions and climbing the corporate ladder. Like I didn't know anything about that. I just took a job that I thought I would like.
Yes, it is very different in a corporate situation versus a clinical practice. So describe, so you come to Royal Canin,
Mhm.
pet food company, and it is not the same, quite the same Royal Canin as it is today. So what was it like when you first started?
It was like a startup. We were so small. We had just gotten a line of vet diets merged in from when Mars acquired Royal Canin and brought the Waltham vet diets in. And then shortly thereafter, we acquired IVD, Innovative Veterinary Diets, and they all got merged in together. And so we were a really small team, and a really small business, honestly. And everything that needed to be done, we just sort of all pitched in and did it. I mean, there weren't different jobs I mean, there were some different jobs for different things, but there were a lot of things that we were so small that it was like, well, who's going to do this? And I mean, just all sorts of things. I remember one time myself and another veterinarian, we were packing the goodie bags for a sales meeting, and someone was like, why are you guys doing this? And we're like, because it has to get done. There's nobody else to do it. I mean, We don't all just sit around and take calls and consults all day. So it was really fun though. I mean, because of that, everything was like figure it out. And then, we kind of grew. And as we grew, I'm proud to say we really kept that entrepreneurial spirit going. I think that's the case where a lot of companies start to lose that and become a little bit more slow to move and not quite as nimble. And we fought really hard to stay nimble during all that time. But yeah, it was smaller, so there was just a lot more going on for any individual person. I was one of two vets in the office at the time, and so anything vet related from any direction would come to one of the two of us, and that's a lot. That encompasses a lot of stuff in our company.
Yes, I still remember a associate at work that brought me a fecal sample in the office because they had a concern about their own pet, and I was the first vet they encountered. So, yes, all sorts of things come your way when you're a veterinarian. Um, so what were you learning at this point? Because I mean, of course I see you today, and you are now working on a global level within the business. So what were some of those early learnings that you found as your role changed along the way?
The first job that I had was in customer care, and I think that taught me the most about the business because you know um, people who buy the product, they ask all kinds of questions, and some questions are predictable, like what's the main ingredient or what's the right diet for my specific pet, things that you would think you would get on a a consult line from a pet food company. But then there would be others that they would ask us, well, what's the cook temperature? And as much as we could find those things out, I mean, some things were proprietary, but whatever wasn't proprietary, we'd end up going and trying to find them the answers and call them back with. And so you ended up getting to really understand how the business worked, and specifically how the manufacturing process worked, because people had a lot of questions about manufacturing, or if they had a complaint, that something's not right about the kibble, or it looks too dark, or maybe it's burned, and then you'd have to do a follow-up investigation on it, and you just really got to learn a lot about what goes into making pet food and quality and food safety. And so I would say that was the best learning to come into the business, because it showed me how all of the business has to work together to serve, at the end of the day, the customer. And then I moved into other roles that taught me a lot as well. And that's one of the things I would say for people who are maybe looking to make a change, is always, always, always be open to new and sometimes weird opportunities, because there were roles that I got offered that on sort of the superficial level might have looked like not the right role, but then I ended up doing it, and it taught me a lot. And then conversely, there were a couple roles that I was offered that I felt like they were too far outside the lines, and I didn't take them, and I kind of regret some of those in the past as well.
Do you mind sharing one of those as an example or?
Yeah, I was actually in a role where I was doing training exclusively and training our sales team. And my boss at the time, who was the head of HR, he said, he this was actually the lesson he was trying to show me, was you should be open to things that are outside your comfort zone. And he said, if the business really wanted to stretch you, we would send you to the commercial team, which, for our business is the equivalent of the purchasing team. So I said, why in the world would we do that? That no, no, I don't want to go. No, that doesn't even fit. And he said, well, they buy our proteins, they buy our grains, they buy our fats and oils. You understand the nutrition part, but what you don't have is the negotiation or the finance part. And that's going to be helpful for you, probably at some point in your career, to really understand a balance sheet and a P&L. And it just, I couldn't make it click. I was just like, no, no, don't ask, because the answer is no. And he said, I'm not asking, but I'm just telling you as an example, that's a way that we could stretch you. And I think he did have in mind that if I would have maybe kind of bid on it, that we would actually take a look at that. But I didn't. And I was just so opposed to it. And and later on I saw, you know what, he was 100% right. It would have been a good experience. That team turns out is a really great team to work for. I mean, the people are fantastic, so that would have been good. But also later on, when I got onto the leadership team for the U.S. business, I didn't understand how to read a P&L, and that was an obstacle for me for a while. I had to go out and figure it out on my own, on the side, when I could have come into that role maybe knowing it had I chosen the right path. So yeah, I should have been more open at the time.
And do you find that people are afraid that if they take a kind of an unusual opportunity when it comes to their career, that they're afraid that they take it and hate it, but get stuck there? What would you think about that, or say to someone who that might be their concern?
Generally speaking, if you do something like that and you take maybe a non-traditional role, most of the time that's going to be looked upon favorably by um, leadership or people a little bit higher in the company, because it shows that you are open to try new things and to become more well-rounded, and it kind of shows that you're a bit of a risk taker. Because you are gonna go out and try something that you probably don't have a lot of skill in, and especially if you're successful, then it demonstrates that you have, the ability to learn in a wide variety of spheres. And so I can definitely understand, someone feeling that way initially and thinking, I really don't know that I want to do this, and I certainly don't want to get stuck over there. But there's more positive, I think, that would come out of doing something like that than negative. So I'd still recommend, give it a look, at least give it a fair look. Unlike me with the example that I gave, where I just sort of shut it down and didn't even do any sort of critical analysis of it. I just said no. At least do a critical analysis of it. Maybe it's still not right, and that's fine, but give it a look.
I love that advice. So eventually you get to the leadership team within the US business. So what do you think were some of the biggest things that helped you get to that point? And maybe what was your biggest interest to get there and what helped you get there?
I think it was so one of the things that I wanted to do, to be on the leadership team, was to bring the veterinary voice to the leadership team. And there was another veterinarian who led the veterinary sales and marketing team, who was already on the leadership team. But he had stopped practicing very early on, and he had kind of moved much more down the sales and marketing route. And although, again, he was a veterinarian, that really was not, he wasn't very clinical anymore. And so I kind of wanted to have that sort of clinical perspective on the leadership team, to say, guys, a lot of these things that we talk about, they sound like really good ideas, and maybe we can make them work. But really, from a practicing vet's point of view, here are some of the things that we should be thinking about. I really wanted to be that voice of the practicing vet on the leadership team. So that was kind of my motivation. The way I got there is I just, I had a few really good connections with well, one or two people on the leadership team, but also people underneath them, and just, tried to be a sponge to everything I could learn from them. There's a lot of kind of the things that you would think about being on a leadership team, again, like I was saying, with the understanding the P&L, and how to understand the financials of the business. But there's also, kind of the people dynamics that you can get from talking to other people, and, like, what's that team like, what's that team's personality, and would I fit in, and how would I fit in, and what would I bring to it, and what would I get from it. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about those things. And then, just the best thing that you can do for your career, no matter what stage you're in, is the job that you're doing, do it really well. Because, I mean, it all sort of starts and stops there. If you're not doing it well, it's not always that easy to get promoted. And if you are doing it well, that's probably the best thing that you can do to get promoted.
I love that. Any things you learned being on a leadership team as well that kind of helped you going into the future?
The It's funny, because the reason that I wanted to be on the leadership team, in a way, became one of my biggest barriers, is um not that they didn't value having the veterinary opinion on there, but they wanted all of me, not just the veterinarian part of me. And I at first didn't get that. I thought, well, here's what's different, here's what the team's missing, and here's what I have. That's a perfect match, right? And although again, I think that was helpful in certain situations, that that did not give me permission to sort of dial out of conversations on supply chain, for example. I knew nothing about supply chain. We have a supply chain person. He makes a recommendation. I agree. I'm good. He knows his stuff. But that's not at all what my boss at the time wanted. He said, we're all running this business. So we all are talking about all aspects of it. And so maybe I sort of had in my mind, I'll be the veterinarian and the expert on that particular topic. It didn't mean that that's all my responsibility was. I had to participate and learn about supply chain and learn about finance and learn about marketing and these things that I had not previously learned about. And I think that was a big challenge for me at first because my identity was so wrapped up in being a veterinarian. I just never thought about those things. But my boss was really patient with me to give me this time and space to learn those things and to, help me develop in those areas. And I think that's probably helped me a lot more along the way than I probably would have imagined when I was going through it.
Oh, wow. That's really valuable. So it's this constant learning about the whole ecosystem of wherever you are, whether you're in a clinic, in the government, in an industry setting. It's very helpful to be well-rounded in your knowledge as well. And I think that potentially has the impact of being a better advocate for your ultimate goal of being the veterinary voice was to also understand everything else that was going on.
Hmm.
Yeah.
For sure.
Um, So so the next step was you eventually got to a global level as
Hmm.
well. Were some of the same goals that you were focused on to make you interested in going more in a bigger impact way?
That's a good question. I would say not specifically.
Okay.
So what had happened is the role that I had on the U.S. leadership team, the areas that I was looking after were the veterinary part of the team of veterinarians, I should say specifically, as well as traditional corporate affairs things. So government affairs, regulatory affairs, communications, sort of all those fell within my area of responsibility. And we had started to pick up a lot of momentum on some of the things that we were doing on with the team of veterinarians, and especially as we've seen in the market in the U.S. for well, quite a few years now, but back then it was when it was really getting a lot of initial momentum was the consolidation of the market by the large multi-practice hospital businesses. And I had started, working with the chief medical officers of our customers, those large businesses. And that was something we had key account managers. So we had the sales interface to those businesses, but I was starting to work on the medical interface to those businesses. And it was really helping. I mean, I think we were all really happy with the progress we were making, and then consolidation, started leaping out of the borders of North America and started happening in other places in Europe and in Australia, New Zealand. Now it's really happening fast in Asia as well. And so I think that was really what happened is in the US, because it happened there first, we had built kind of a center of expertise on it just because that's what the business required. And so as it started to move globally, there was sort of a recognition that we need to be managing these relationships globally too, particularly for the those businesses that are going to be spanning multiple countries or continents in the case of some of them. And so they looked at that role and said we need to create this role to do the same thing that they're doing in the U.S. And I was the one doing some of it in the U.S. And so I got that opportunity.
Had you kind of on your own initiative started with that program before Global actually recognized that? Was
Yes, I mean, myself and my boss, well,
okay.
two different bosses. My initial boss on the leadership team, he had actually sort of had the idea to start it and really encouraged it, and then he got a promotion, and his successor saw it and continued, also believed it was important and continued to support me. And so, have to give a lot of credit to them because if they hadn't thought it was important, I mean, I could have tried to get something going on my own, but it probably would have been a lot more difficult and a lot more slow going. But they were very supportive, and so a lot of it was their voice up into the global team of, look what we're able to do, and ultimately I think that that was a big um, part of why the global team said, or, and of course I wasn't in on the conversation, so I'm only speculating, but we see what's going on in the US, and as this is going on in other places, we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to be managing it in the best way we can. And so I think that was really kind of where it came from, more than just anything strategic that I did or started on my own.
So, kind of through the process of the industry, because it sounds like that was really where you wanted to go. What was some of the most rewarding parts of the job as you were are going through industry and your career journey there?
I probably didn't start an industry with this in mind, but be in for people who aren't familiar with industry, you get the opportunity to do a lot of leadership training, and some of it's very operational, like first line manager kind of training, all the way up to some of it's a bit more strategic and, dare I say, philosophical sometimes. And I happened to be in one of those philosophical types of trainings that, we were focusing a lot on, why do we do what we do? What's our personal why behind stuff? And it was very probing kind of training. And, you know, I probably didn't know I was doing it at the time, but what became apparent to me later in my career when I really stopped to look at it is that I I think it's my personal mission, and it's certainly what I really enjoy doing, is helping pets through helping the people who help pets, more than being the first line pet helper. I mean, again, I still do relief work, so I do like working in practice, but I really like helping the people who work in practice more than that. And so that was sort of my, I guess, aha moment, was realizing my why was helping the people who help pets. And so that's been something, since I've recognized that, everything's really clear as to why I've done what I've done, and obviously how I make choices now. But that was it, was figuring that out for myself.
Is that something you would recommend people do, no matter where they are in their career, just have that opportunity to stop and really ask that question?
Yes, and don't stop until you get the answer, because it's not going to be the first time you ask yourself that question is probably not going to really be the answer. It even if it seems like it is, it's just really sort of, you hear people talk about the five whys. Ask yourself why five times to really get to an answer. It's kind of that. I don't know if there's anything magic about five whys, but there's something magic about more than one. I'll say that. And so um, that was really, I think, helpful for me. I was kind of acting in line with that anyway. I just didn't necessarily understand. I knew what felt like the right choice to make, and now looking back, I can say, well, that's it was being driven by that. But at the time, it was not top of mind to me that that's why I was doing it.
Where does the five whys come from? Is that a book or?
I don't know. I don't know if it's a book or not. I've heard people reference it before, but as a way to sort of get to the bottom of any type of question, is to ask why five times, because you start to sort of tear away at the superficial reasons that we say things, and then get to the real depth of one. But I really don't know what the reference of that is.
Okay. So it's kind of like, well, I like pets. So the next why would be, well, why do I like pets? So that keep kind of asking the
Hmm.
why five times.
It's
Got it.
exactly it. And yes, and whatever your answer is, ask why to that answer until you get to what in theory should be the core answer.
Gotcha. Oh, I like that a lot. Um, So what, because you've done so many different things. I know beyond just like the core job that you have, you also have a part in a lot of other different things. I know you have personal finance interest. Where did that come into play?
That that actually started back when I was in practice, and I had, in the first job that I had a mentor who was another really good general practice vet, and one of the reasons that I took my very first job was to get to learn from him. And separate from veterinary medicine, he had an interest in finances, and so one night, I mean, I was young and didn't know anything about anything. And he asked me, he said, has anyone ever talked to you about saving for retirement? And no one had. And I didn't even really know what that meant. And he said, here, I've got some things to show you. And this was quite a while ago before, we have what we have now in terms of tools and information and the internet. And he had a folder where he had clipped articles from like Kiplinger's and at the time Money magazine, and it was about retirement, and were these charts of if you save $2,000 a year beginning at age 25, and you do that and you get the market rate of return by specific age, you'll have $1 million invested. And it just blew me away. It's like, how in the world could I ever have $1 million? That just doesn't seem possible. And he said, nope, the math works. It's just compounding. And it got me really interested. So I started down the road based on saving for retirement, but it ignited an interest that I didn't know I had up until that point, and I really got into it. And it was always sort of an avocation for me until much like other people during the lockdowns of COVID, um, you start to sort of ask yourself questions, and is this, you know, what do I want to be doing, that sort of thing. And one of the things that I sort of discovered about myself is that I love this. I've always loved it. I just haven't talked about it much because I did sometimes if you say that you're interested in finance or money, um, fairly or unfairly, you get colored with a certain crayon, at that point, usually that crayon is green, but it wasn't about that for me. It was more about independence, financial independence of being able to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, and how you want for as long as you want. And it wasn't about having stuff or having a certain bank account amount. It was really just the freedom that can come with, having your finances in order. And so I mentioned it to some colleagues that I was really interested in it. And I kind of did it, sort of like, what are they going to
Cringing.
say? Yeah. And they were like, that's cool. And I said, really? And they said, yeah, why wouldn't it be? And I said, I don't know. Sometimes people think you're very money motivated. And they said, but you're not. You said you weren't. And I said, well, yeah, I know. And so anyway, it just sort of spawned, and I thought, this went better than I thought it should, or thought it would. And really with this issue that we have in veterinary medicine with young vets and the debt, and my debt to income ratio when I graduated was 2.2 to 1. So I know exactly where they are. I was there too. And I thought, maybe I can be of help. Who would you rather listen to? Someone who's gone through what you've gone through, or someone who's been, trained to sell you something? And so I thought maybe I could start talking to vets, especially early career vets, about this in a way that doesn't overwhelm them, that doesn't scare them, that doesn't make them think someone's trying to sell them something, because I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just trying to help educate them, much like someone did for me. And so that's how I got into it. My own initial interest was a long time ago, and I've just been doing it and not necessarily talking about it a lot. And then recently I started talking about it more because I saw an opportunity maybe to help younger vets. And yeah, so that's kind of the genesis of how it all came to be.
And you're currently not only do you have an interest, but you are pursuing a degree in personal finance as well, correct?
That's correct. Because I have my own experience, and I feel very blessed with where things are for me. But I don't want to universalize that and say because it worked for me, this is what you should do. I really wanted to learn it like in a real way, not just sort of, well, I read all of these blogs, which there's a lot you can get out of those for sure. But I really wanted a more formal academic training in this. If I'm going to go and really try to help people, I really want a real education behind it, so that when I get questions that I'm going to answer based on, kind of the current thought versus, um, well, I don't know, but this would be my best guess kind of stuff. You never know everything about a subject, but still, I wanted real training and not just to lean on my own experience or what someone else had written in a blog post or whatever. I really wanted to kind of get the real information. So I applied to get into school, and got in, and have been taking classes ever since. And at some point, it in theory will end in a master's degree, but I'm really kind of following the path a little bit more just to learn what I can learn from it. I've actually started looking on beyond when I finish what I'm doing at this particular program, to see if I can find another place that has slightly different classes that I can keep taking some in. Because I do really like this topic. I mean, I legitimately like learning about it, but I also think it could, kind of keep me learning more to be able to teach others more.
Have you taken the Strength Finders test?
I have, but goodness, it has been a
Oh,
long
wow.
time ago. I don't necessarily remember what my results were, but I have taken it. I can try to find those results now that you're saying that. I wonder what they would be.
I surprised you that question. I was just curious if learner was one of your top five,
It
just based on your eagerness to learn.
it might it I think it was. I hate to say that because I just don't know. I'll see if it comes up easily on
Oh,
my
that's fine.
laptop here, but I do not remember what my strength finders were.
No, I just love that I'm a learner too, so that's why I identify with that. Just sometimes it's just the excitement of learning something new. Now, I can definitely tell you still have an end goal. It's not just to learn, but it's because you are trying to truly help people. So you're going to school, you're continuing this education really outside of a very typical veterinary education, not to go into personal finance as your full-time career, correct? Or is that something?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. No. And by the way, I did find my strength finder.
Oh,
My
okay.
most recent number one is learner.
Ah,
Number
got it.
two is responsibility. Three is harmony. Four is connectedness, and five is relator. Sorry for that divergence, but yes, no. The idea is, I mean, if I don't see myself as wanting to be like a financial advisor, necessarily. I would like to maybe help coach or counsel people who want to learn more about managing their own finances. But I don't want to be a stock picker, or I don't necessarily even want to do full on financial plans, like kind of the level of detail that's required for that. I'd rather sort of help people get on the right path, or help talk them down when they're feeling like they're on the wrong path. That sort of thing I think is a little bit more interesting to me. But as far as career change, that is not my goal. I mean, you never say never, because you don't know what opportunities come up. But that's not was not the reason that I started this, and not where I have my mind at right now, for sure.
So, I mean, this may be very intriguing to people who still would like to have a veterinary, kind of a more typical veterinary path, or I don't know if I could call yours completely typical, but but a veterinary path, very sciencey, very understandable. But maybe they have a very big interest
Mhm.
that to help something else. Any advice around, kind of staying with a career, but also really blossoming an additional interest that you have?
Um, don't be afraid to try it. I mean, for me, that was my own sort of boundary. As I mentioned in the earlier story, that I put on myself earlier, was like, oh, if I talk about this, people are going to think I'm all about money or whatever. And so I'm just not going to do that. And so I kind of limited myself. um, since I started talking about it, people have, provided me opportunities to get in front of groups to speak, to start having these conversations about, here's some things that you should be thinking about. Here's some things that you can start doing early in your career that might help, your situation for later. And so it was quite the opposite of what I thought it would be. Instead of getting sort of, pigeonholed or shut down, it's actually brought more opportunities to talk to people. And because I think down deep we all know that we could probably all use a little financial advice, on different aspects of our life. And so this was just like, hey, why don't we get you in front of this group of veterinarians or veterinary technicians, and actually in some cases as well, I'm sure they could benefit from hearing, like, where do I get started? Who do
Mhm.
I ask for help? That sort of thing.
So it sounds like don't be afraid to first think about it, talk about it to people that you feel are start with a safe person, right?
Hmm.
To talk about it, and on both sides, encourage people who do maybe express some interest, um, and don't be afraid to pursue it. I love that.
Yeah. I think on the academic side, being veterinarians, we're not usually afraid of that part of it, because I mean, we just that's kind of our thing. Schools kind of our thing, but yeah, I mean, but the other sometimes for me it turned out that it was getting to the school. It wasn't do I want to go to school or not? It's just like, you know, is this even the right path? But yeah, don't be afraid to bring it up to people and if it's what you want to do, it's probably, the right thing for you to do.
Wonderful. And I probably should call out, you do have quite a few musical instruments behind you as well. So you also have time for some hobbies. Yes?
I try. I'm not naturally talented musically, and even with a lot of practice, I'm not especially talented. But I do like to play, and so I do try to make time for it. Yes,
And what is your favorite type of music?
to listen to or to play.
Oh, well, both. Are they
To
different?
listen, yes,
Okay.
because to listen to is heavy metal, and it's far too hard for me to be able to play. I'd love to be able to play it, but it's too technical. It's far too hard. So for playing, I just probably more kind of straightforward rock and roll, like kind of just more, I guess, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here, but just more rock and roll that people would listen to and recognize, whereas heavy metal's a little bit kind of a version of rock and roll that not everybody is as fond of. So I really like to listen to metal, but I'm not good enough to play it, so it's generally just rock and roll that I play.
I remember that was one of the most surprising things I learned about you when I was starting. Was I think I walked by one of the conference rooms and I just heard this blaring heavy metal music. Like, who is in there? And it's Dr. Brent Mayabb. I'm like, oh wow, okay. I love that. Have you, has that been like most of your life? That was something you were interested in, or like
A
back from
lot
high
of,
school? Yeah.
yes, a lot of it, yes.
Love that. See, we're all multidimensional. I love it. So before we get to the rapid fire questions, do you have any kind of last minute piece of advice for our colleagues when it pertains to just going through life journey plus career journey?
I mean, it's what I was mentioning earlier. Always be open to opportunities, even if they seem like a little bit outside of your comfort zone or outside of where you see yourself going. At least give it some thought, because you never know what it could bring to you. And the times that I've done that, it's paid off. And as I shared with you at the other example, the time that I recall not doing it, I feel like I did miss out. So always be open to opportunities, even if they don't feel like it's the path that you ever imagined yourself on.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. All right. So our rapid fire questions to end us today. What is something on your bucket list that you'd like to do?
Like to go to Scotland. I did the ancestry blood test, and it turns out that there's a lot of my heritage is Scottish, and I've never been there, so I'd like to go to Scotland.
Oh, very nice. What is a simple moment that brings you joy?
You know, honestly, good weather here in the Midwest. Good weather, that's enough to bring me joy. When I go outside and it's sunny and it's not terribly hot, that little moment is just like, this is really nice.
Oh, I love that. If you could create a law that everyone had to follow, what would your law be?
Always be learning.
Oh, very nice. And what is something you are most grateful for?
Goodness, my wife. I mean, just uh, I mean, you mentioned it earlier. She's I think so much of her in terms of kind of like the husband wife relationship, but in addition, she's a veterinarian, and so as you said, like, we understand each other professionally too, and that's really nice. I mean, I could, especially early in my career, when we're both working these super long days, and it's not ideal, but it was never a thing because we both kind of got it because we were in the same boat. And so I think that's It's really, really nice to be in the same profession, particularly a profession that can be sometimes super demanding.
Yes. And I think that's why even as colleagues, we really bond. We're a small profession, so we really appreciate each other when we have those moments of understanding, just like nobody else quite understands us.
And that's true. I've found, Megan, globally. Like, I will meet vets in other countries and have just this automatic, sort of natural relationship with them. Like, it's just like, you get it, I get it. We've been through a lot of the same stuff, even though I don't know specifically about you or you about me. But like, there's just something because I've been in vet clinics in a lot of different countries, and it's always there. It's always there. It's this almost immediate collegiality. It is amazing. I mean, we are part of a very special profession.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear that it's on a global level too. Well,
Yeah.
thank you again for coming and sharing with us. I know that you have done some wonderful things already in your career. You're helping a lot of people, and I hope to spread this so you continue to help other people.
Well, you're very kind. I've been blessed, and I definitely don't take it for granted. And I appreciate the time to get to talk to you today. For me,
All
fine for me. I mean, it's weird to talk about yourself because, like, for me, like every sentence I'm saying, I'm like, this is so boring. God,
No, it's not.
nobody's gonna tune in for this, or nobody's gonna. I mean, they'll listen, they'll start, they won't finish. I'm like, oh my God, that's so boring. Can't you make a better story out of that? And it's like, it what you heard happen, that's actually how it happened, so that is the story. I'm sure a gifted storyteller could tell it better, but at the end of the day, it's it is what happened. It's not that exciting.
No, it's you know, the ability to relate is really important. And, you know, it may seem boring to you, but when you create a Me Too moment or, um, you are even in a different position than other people are, and they see that as an opportunity to do something different. I think it really is a lot valuable. I think we underestimate what seems plain to us
Mhm.
when we are trying to connect with others and try to help others. So, you've been listening to the Vet Life Reimagined podcast, a Sprinkle of Wisdom production. If you know someone who would appreciate this conversation, please share it with them. Another way to support the podcast is to rate and review it on your favorite listening platform. There's also a YouTube version of this podcast, so if you want to check it out, it is the Vet Life Reimagined YouTube channel, so you can go over and find it there. And I also want to thank everyone who has been part of my own veterinary life. Thank you for being on the journey with me.